This is Free Trader Beowulf calling anyone. Mayday, Mayday, we are under attack. Main drive is gone. Turret number 1 not responding. Mayday, losing cabin pressure fast. Calling anyone, please help. This is Free Trader Beowulf. Mayday, repeat.
Welcome to Roleplay Geeks. This is your host, Frank.
This is your token hippie, John.
I'm Jim.
And this is Steve-O, a.k.a. the other Steve.
The Steven won't be joining us today, but we'll try to carry on without him and his interesting segues and see if we can soldier on without too much trouble. This week, we're going to talk about something that we've never talked about before. No, wait.
Oh, yeah.
The polar opposite.
Yeah,
we talk about every single episode, which is Traveler. Okay, so we reference Traveler constantly. And it's because I think it's fair to say, gun to head, one of, if not our favorite role-playing game is Traveler, all in all. Certainly in the assembled 4 people here. Which is part of the reason Steven's not in this. He was just going to talk smack, so we got rid of him. It's just how it is.
Yeah,
anyway.
We can't handle that.
Anyway, we're gonna talk a little bit about Traveler, and Traveler is an interesting game, and it reminds me a little bit of the Velvet Underground. So there's this famous quote about the Velvet Underground that said that almost nobody bought I'm paraphrasing here, but almost nobody bought the first album, but everyone who did started a band. All right, so I kind of feel like Traveler, it's almost as old as D&D, because it started in 1978 or something like that, 79, 77. So it's the exact same age. The first edition of D&D technically came out in 77, or the Monster Manual and the Player's Handbook and all those guys, the first editions. So it is as old as D&D in a lot of ways, and it's obviously vastly less well known than Dungeons and Dragons, but its fan base is the root word of the term fan. It's very fanatical. It's very avidly connected, and most people, I think, end up playing Traveler, play it for life, and roll lots of different ways into it. So it's a really fascinating game that you may have heard of, but probably never played. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Cool.
Awesome.
Next.
What
so let's talk about
enthusiasm we have here. It's morning.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the history. So like we said, it came out in 1977, and in the last, what would that be, 43 years or so, it's gone through a lot of iterations. Some of them quite good, some of them less good. And
yeah. So
there's a lot of versions, and let's start teasing some of that out. Go ahead.
Yeah, some Traveler had, as we've already stated, come out in the late 70s, and it came out around the same time as Star Wars did. So there was a bit of a science fiction revolution going on, science fiction movies with the success of Star Wars. So it really hit at a very good time, even though it's not really like Star Wars, but at the same time, it could be Star Wars if you want. And then there was a ton of supplements put out when the game was popular in the late 70s, probably up to about the mid-80s. The game remained pretty popular, and there was just tons and tons of supplements. FASA was known to produce several supplements and modules for the game. And then game design workshops at the end of the 80s, like a lot of role-playing games, started having issues, so they went out of business. I'm not sure exactly when. And after that, in the mid-90s, Mark Miller actually put out, it was Far Future Enterprises, right, Jimmy? I think, in the mid-90s under that company name. And
Far Future Enterprises.
Yeah, I bought just about every book out of it. And then, since then...
well, actually, okay, so I got the timeline here. So actually, Far Future didn't come into the game until the 2013, believe it or not. It was Imperium Games that did
Mark Miller's Traveler.
Mark Miller's Traveler in the mid-90s, yeah.
That's correct.
And then Steve Jackson Games did a
GURPS.
short-lived GURPS edition, and then they produced that for a bit, and then Mongoose got involved, and Far Future Enterprises and Mongoose have gone back and forth since mid-2000s.
Yeah, Mongoose is actually just I just discovered this when we started. Jimmy's getting ready to run a new campaign, and I just discovered that they've got a Mongoose second edition out now. And in fact, I ordered the core rule book. I don't know why, because the first edition is just as good, but it's got a lot of pretty pictures in it, man. I got the PDF and everything. I ordered
It's also got some. It's got some changes to the rules, some mistakes that were fixed.
Not much.
Yeah, a
I
few
mean,
things,
but it's a nice looking book, and of course I'll end up collecting all those as well, just because that's the way I roll with Traveler. So
I found that's usually what happens is whenever there's a new version, there's actually not much real change in the rules. It's just errata. It's literally, it's just, here's all these fixes to like typos, typographic errors.
actually,
etc.
there's an addendum already for this one, and it just
I'm
came
not
out in
surprised.
2020, I think. Yeah.
There's when you start digging into it, actually, there's some significant changes to some of the tables, which, again, on the surface, you'd go, that you wouldn't even notice it. But when you actually start looking at the tables in a lot of detail, like the spaceship development system is slightly tweaked to be better. All right, so Steve gave the compressed history, so let's just spend a little bit of time.
There's one version I forgot to mention, and that's one called Traveler: The New Era.
Well, yeah, so there's a reason he didn't mention it, because it's awful.
Well,
It's just it's probably the low point. I think you could go back and forth between that and GURPS, which is the worst.
and we forgot to mention Mega Traveler.
Well,
It was another version that came after Traveler. So Traveler, you exist in this huge imperium. Think of the Empire, and led by noble houses and all this kind of stuff. A little bit like Dune, I guess. But there's also other governments. It's thousands and thousands of worlds, and then the next version of Mega Traveler is the Empire is shattered and is under civil war. Is the backdrop to that system. And then Traveler: The New Era is there's this computer virus that's transmitted between all the ships and all the computers, so the entire galaxy just shuts down and goes into a dark ages. And then you represent characters who have figured out a way to get around the computer virus and go back out and explore and rediscover the worlds and everything. So, and then of course Traveler, the Mark Miller's Traveler went back to year 0, which went in the past about 1100 years. And I'm not sure what the time. I think they just went back to standard timelines with Mongoose, didn't they, Jimmy? I think they just went back to the 11. The assumption is it's the year 1106 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think they just went back to the beginning, the core.
so that's a really good point. Let's talk about our approach to Traveler, which is a little bit different than Traveler. Okay, so Steve just did lay out more or less the history, and again, let's go back and tease these out a little bit more detailed. So the initial edition of Traveler came out in these little books that were, well, compared to other role-playing games at the time, they were little. They're like an A4 paper size or something like that, and they almost look like pamphlets.
Yeah, they were basically
Well-
pamphlets. They were basically half.
Interestingly, the original game Chainmail, which Dungeons and Dragons is derived from, was published in the same format.
Right.
And then I think Chainmail had some supplement that I can't think of right now that was published in the little small book. And I think, honestly, that's why probably Traveler followed suit, even though Dungeons and Dragons TSR was getting ready to release Dungeons and Dragons in the larger format. They always stuck with the small books, at least in its first iteration.
Didn't that come out of the tabletop wargaming community? That's sort of how they did their rule sets.
I'm not sure.
Well, if you actually think about a lot of board games, they tend to have game books that are roughly that size. So it's sort of, if you kind of think about Monopoly or whatever, they're about that size. They're just not as detailed because they are a proper pamphlet. But the original edition, what is now called Classic Traveler, came out in a series of books, and they were numbered 0 through 12 or something like that. The rules were through like 8 or 9 or something, and then there was a series. Well, then there was a series of modules, and I never completely understood exactly. And some of them were just like compendiums of these are all the items you can buy and all the ships you can run, all that sort of stuff. And I can't remember which one were actually rules and which ones were just modules and which ones were, important bits. But the thing that was kind of neat about it was people would refer to books almost by their number. So like Mercenaries was like a huge deal. So just use book 4. Yeah, just use book 4. And you'd have to collect all these, to get all these different rule sets. And so I think book 0 and 1 had all the Mercenaries and the High Guard, which is like the Navy and all that stuff in there at some level. But to get the detailed, the more interesting stuff, you had to get these individual books.
Yeah, the original box set, which I found, at A-Mart, that department store I've talked about before, the same place I bought my original box set of Dungeons and Dragons and my Dungeon Master Guide and all that. They had the box set of Traveler. I just picked it up one day, and it had 1, 2, and 3. And the first book, I think, is characters and just basically how to play the game. And it only had Army, Navy, Merchant Marine, I think. I would have to grab my book. I'm embarrassed I can't remember. But it wasn't a whole lot of these categories. And so then you added, when book 4 came out, Mercenary, it not only added a new character class, which was Marines, but it sort of expanded the ground pounder, mobile infantry, soldier. It really expanded the skills and things that you could get was part of the book. There was another part that we all loved called Ironmongery, which was an arsenal of these futuristic weapons, which we all love. I mean, for me, I love military science fiction anyway, and I loved reading Hammer Slammers. By the way, John, you read those, didn't you? David Drake's Hammer
Slammers? What the heck?
Oh, yeah,
it's
they're great.
Slammer?
It's about a
I was going
mercenary
to get
group
to
in
them, but
the
I never
future.
did. Yeah, I've got a couple of them, but I haven't read them yet.
There's a supplement,
Hammer Slammer.
Traveler supplement for Hammer Slammers, by the way.
Was it written by a 12-year-old? Hammer Slammer?
They're like no. It's David Drake, man. And he
was 14.
It's about futuristic grav tanks. It's like tank crews in the future fighting mercenary wars and stuff. So anyway, another section in Mercenary covers how you can create your own mercenary groups, and then say the characters all want to be, hey, we all want to be a mercenary group, which was popular in science fiction at that time. And so the 4 of us would have our mercenary, whatever company, and then it would show how to handle group combat, like in a miniatures type setting where whether they do this or that and things. So it added more than just the character class. And the same thing with High Guard, which was the one based around the Navy. High Guard added more. It expanded the starship combat, and that's where the original ship creation and everything really came out of too. I'm probably talking way too much about Traveler.
Hammer Slammer.
This is sort of my episode.
Right. Okay, so, but let's talk a little bit about classic Traveler. So, essentially, you could divide it into 2 bits. The first bit is the set of rules. Now, what was very popular at the time was very intricate rules. So D&D set up this general approach of make a rule for everything. So no matter what you could think of doing, there was a rule for it, which was a bit of a cumbersomeness. I always felt that Traveler, to some extent, took that a little bit further in the sense of, there would be these calculus equations that were just beyond me to understand whenever I was, in middle school or high school, how to create a world and things like that. But they would boil it down to a lot of all that, just some tables that were a lot easier to get. So it was a very intricate, and I can see where it would be an off-putting system, because if you didn't dig into it too hard, you could get put off by all the really complex math. And if you didn't realize, you didn't have to do all that stuff. You didn't have to construct a world using their geometry and physics equations.
It's not really that difficult. It's time-consuming would be a better word for it.
Now I've done it. It's difficult. I mean, it's once it is, and it's difficult if you're 15 and you're not familiar with all the physics and intricate math. If you've gone through college and you've taken multivariate calculus, it's not hard, no. But if you haven't, it's very off-putting, especially when they show these equations. You're like, I don't think I can understand this.
No, well, the important thing to remember about it is that Traveler up front, if you want to create worlds, if you want to build your own ships, and character creation is very involved. Up front, yes, it's going to... In fact, when you roll up your characters, you're better off to your very first game night. Instead of everybody rolling up separately, you're better to get together, everybody roll up their characters together, and you start building this history, because it's all built on a former... usually military career, but it can be a merchant career. The new rules have, entertainer, drifter. It has other things, rogues, agents, and things. But originally it was all based on you were former military people. And now you're all together in some type of private setting, like on a trade ship or an exploratory vessel or something like that. But once you're playing the game, the combat system's quite simple. And that's one thing that attracted me to it. It's a lot of preparation up front if you want it to be, but you don't have to do that to play the game at all.
Oh, yeah.
And then the starship combat is relatively simple as well. So I don't want to give the wrong impression that this game, oh my God, I don't know how to do math. I can't play Traveler. It's absolutely not like that.
Well, it depends on
it
the
can
version
be
of
if you
Traveler you play. Definitely depends on the version you play.
Well,
you
okay,
can
so
make
again,
it complicated if you want. You can take it as far as you want, but you don't have to do that to play the game. Plus, there's tons of supplements out there, already has pre-generated ships and stuff.
Remember,
right,
we're trying to do a historical point of view. Yes, since in the last 43 years, they've made it easier. I'm just trying to deal with classic Traveler at this minute. Just this minute, before we move on.
So, hey, has anybody seen the Traveler 5? So Mongoose has a version of Traveler out. And then Mark Miller just released Traveler 5, which is about 150 pounds of paper. It's basically a doorstop. You want to talk about calculus? That's
the thing is
Mark Miller.
Yeah, Mark Miller designed the original Traveler.
Right.
And, I mean, that's what I'm saying is that the original Traveler could be very off-putting because it had all that stuff in it, and you'd go, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. And you had to dig to realize, oh, it's actually not that complicated. It's not. It's just you have to go through a lot of stuff to realize it's not that bad, which is the point I was trying to make before Steve got offended.
I sort of looked at it a little differently. Because it's more like,
of course you do.
You have the option to be as complicated as you want to.
Again, the way the rules are presented, because I was looking at them this morning or last night, the way the rules are presented, it doesn't look like you have the option. When you start digging into it, you realize, oh, this is all optional. I can skip all this junk and just roll some dice, and it's not hard. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of time, but it's not hard. And so the reason I'm trying to belabor this point is because one of the few things that I happen to think, let's move forward in the history, that Mega Traveler did a great job at doing was getting rid of a lot of that complexity and saying, that exists, but 100% optional. Here's an easier way to do all that stuff. And they brought a lot of that to the forefront, and I think that was a big innovation, despite the fact that the system itself was not particularly great or any better than the original. They brought the presentation style, I guess would be the way I put it, I thought was a lot better at explaining this can be as complex as you want, but it also can be as accessible as you want. Whew, that was a long path to get to the point I was trying to make.
Okay. I can dig it.
Okay.
I've already talked too much. Let me get some coffee. Talks amongst yourselves.
Well, I want to point out one little thing that I kind of liked. It was something that Steve brought up. Was that?
Wait a minute. I wasn't even aware you were on here, John.
Screw you, hippie. So, oh wait, I'm the hippie.
You're so quiet.
Anyway, so the one thing that's really different about Traveler versus D&D and a number of other games is that you start off, like Steve had already said, you've already kind of had this former life. I mean, generally, I usually start my characters off when they're 34 years old. Sometimes I'll get a little bit older and be about 38 or maybe even 42 if I'm really trying to get some skills that I want. But the idea is that you start your character off during character creation at 18 years of age, and then you go through different things. You either go through college, and then you join the Merchant Marines or blah blah blah, or you join the military and you go through the Marines, or you're through the Army or Navy or whatever, and you have a career, and you roll for every year that you are in whatever profession you've chosen. So you basically have a profession that you go through for however many years, 16 years, whatever. Like, as I said, I usually do it 34. And then when you're done, you have a selection of skills. You also have some money. You might even have... Exactly, yeah. You basically have things that you muster out with. And so when you're done, your character is basically the final version of your character. Literally, that is it. So where in D&D you are constantly leveling, especially when you first start off. Almost every time you get together with your friends, you level up in the beginning, and then maybe every other time or whatever. In Traveler, there's no leveling.
Well,
that is a completely...
That's not... Well, it depends on what version you're talking about.
We're talking about classic
version.
Traveler, or even so the early and stuff. They don't have any of that sort of thing.
Well, let's just sort of abandon this historical go through because that failed out of the gate. So we'll just talk about whichever version of Traveler we want to talk about.
So, but the thing is,
what version of Traveler has leveling now, Jimmy?
Mongoose Traveler has a leveling mechanism built in.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I think the difference. I think the big difference is between Dungeons and Dragons is you start out with nothing, right? You start out with a sword and a dagger, and
4 hit points if you're a wizard.
It literally takes 10 minutes, 15 minutes maybe to roll up your character. And Traveler is a very. It's like you're starting a second life. You've already had your military life. And you build this history. So some other things that can happen in character creation in the original version, you had to roll for survival each term, each 4-year term. You had to roll to see if you got injured. And, you could literally die in your character creation before you even started playing the game. Now, they've since taken that one out. But
it's optional now. Yeah.
Optional rule, right. But it is kind of a lame rule in a way. But now you can get injured, you can get ejected from the military. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen. And I've looked the new rules. I just actually purchased the 2nd edition, and it's got some even more interesting background stuff in character creation. One thing I don't like that they changed is you roll up all your attributes, 6 attributes, and then they say you can change it and put whatever attribute, like strength, dexterity, endurance, education, intelligence, and social standing. And you can mix them up and put them wherever you want. I really prefer you roll it, that's what you get. Because to me, when you first roll that character, you're like, oh, wow, man, my guy is a real weakling, but I'm super smart. You already start thinking, hey, what's this guy like? What's he going to be like? Or conversely, you roll up really great strength and endurance, but then maybe not such great dex or low intelligence, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Maybe I should be a Marine. Well, no offense to Marines out there, but maybe I should be, a different kind of character. Maybe I'm not a super smart academic. Instead, I'm a guy that carries a Gauss rifle around.
Yeah, I love that death thing where you could die, because when I'm rolling up the character, it's like, if I go through my first term and I go really good and my character's really awesome and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try again, but I could die. I'll go my second term and he's really, really awesome now. And then it's like, I really wanted vac suit. I really wanted it. I want to go in here. I can get it. Should I try it? And then you go that third term and then you die,
It's almost like gambling, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is when after you hit 34 years of age, as you progress, you actually start to you have a chance to reduce your strength, dexterity, and endurance. Mm-hmm. You can actually lose stat points.
Mm-hmm. That's true, and you can gain them as well.
Yeah, and you can actually go all the way to the end of your character before you ever start playing and kill your character in character creation.
You can.
I mean, without like an accident or something, you could just go to old age all the way to the end.
But again, in character creation, I love that because it lets you build this character with a big history, and you already start. It starts giving you an idea who this guy is and what he's been through and what kind of guy he's going to be. So when you start, when all 4 or 5 characters all get together, or players get together, you've already, and especially if you kind of do it together. I think when you do it together, everybody's like, oh man, look, you got this and you got that. And should I stay for another term? You know, I might die. I might get hurt, you know, making those decisions. And then once you finish out, you're in your mid-30s or maybe 40. You don't want to stay in too long. You get a lot more skills, but then you start getting the age detriments that come with it. So, yeah, it's a very fun process. It's one of my favorite things about Traveler.
Yeah. So I want to make sure we're just focusing on one version since there's like 11 versions of this thing. What, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11 versions of Traveler out there.
Wow.
Let's just focus on Mongoose because, one, it's the most recent version of Traveler. I think it's the most polished. And it's the one we're playing right now. And it's the one I would recommend. If you're getting into Traveler, it's the one I would recommend you buy. So let's sort of focus on it.
It has the flavor of the old classic Traveler, but lots of good improvements.
And if you're a D20 person, never fear. There is a Traveler D20 that you can check out. It came out in the early 2000s. And I think you can get it on Drive-Thru RPG. It's now called something different, like Sci-Fi 20, I think, something like that. Sci-Fi
to be
20
clear,
core rules. Yeah.
To be clear, the reason Jimmy says that is because the system only uses D6s, which is a point we haven't made yet. It's only uses some combinations of D6s, and it's almost always 2D6 for everything you want to try to do.
Unless you fire a plasma weapon, and then it's like 10d6 damage or something.
It's you still roll 2d6 and then you multiply it by 10. Yeah. It's,
D3. Yeah.
They call it D66. Yeah. And that's right. They have D3 in Mongoose, right? Where you half it.
But you still only use a 6-sided dice.
Yeah, it's all 6-siders. I don't know that
that's why I have so many 6-siders.
Right.
I have like cases of them.
Yeah,
I
me
thought it was
too.
because you had a Yahtzee addiction.
Yeah. None of my Yahtzee games, Monopoly games, or Sorry games have dice in them.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
The kids are always screaming, "Where's the dice?" Stay away out of my Traveler.
I got dice, baby.
Stay out of my Traveler.
What color
set.
do you want?
Boxes and boxes of them. Oh, that's a quiet space. Where do we go from here? We're creating
Well, I
editing
want somebody
nightmares.
else to talk for a while because obviously, I mean, I get going and, Jimmy, won't you...
I don't know what we want to talk about next. Frank's the one who tells us what to talk about.
Well, I had a structure, but I got blown to smithereens about 3 seconds into it, and then I tried to get back on it and got blown to smithereens again, so I give up.
Well, the point I was trying to make earlier was about where is the differences between something like a game like D&D where you are constantly leveling up. So when you start your character, like Steve who said, you're practically nothing. You have nothing. You can do very little. It's difficult to take on a kobold, much less, anything else like an orc or, a dragon. You'll never see one of those. You'd immediately be dragon poop, as it were, when you start out. Whereas in Traveler, your character is badass right off the gate. As soon as you finish character creation, they are a fully formed human. They're not an 18-year-old child. They are ready to go, and they've done stuff in their life already. Who knows how many people they've killed or things they've done, the money they've made, things they've gone through. And so when you play it, I think the difference when a player's mentality when you play, what your goal is significantly different from D&D. My point being is that when you play D&D, it's like, oh, I'm leveling up and I get these really cool, like I got a rogue, and when I get to 3rd level, then I'll be able to do backstab, blah blah blah. when you're trying to get a magic item.
I just thought of a neat Star Wars analogy. D&D is Luke Skywalker. Traveler is Han Solo.
Right, yeah.
It's like Luke Skywalker starting out, the farm boy, gains his skills as he goes and becomes powerful.
Right.
Whereas Han Solo already has a big, he's got a deep backstory, and he's this veteran, mid-30s.
Good analogy.
He's already got his, skill base, basically. He already has it because he developed it.
He has a ship. He's already got his buddy. He's already got his group, Chewie.
Well, if you think about it, Traveler really is like a bunch of Han Solos. I mean, it's based a lot around being a trader,
Yeah.
a freighter.
So, to be aware, if you're interested in this game, is that it does favor certain styles of player in character creation versus others. So one of the nice things about D&D is you can sit down and say, I'm in the mood to be this. And you basically can do that, whatever it may be. Certainly if you have alternate dice roll-up things. Whereas in Traveler, you're kind of left to the winds of fate as to what you can be. So you can sit down and say, you have some decision points you can make, but for the most part, things may not go whatsoever the way that you've got in your head, and you have to kind of alter your conceptualization of your character based upon what you roll. And that can be really exciting and fun and a challenge to role play that way. But it also, if you're not the type of person who really likes that, that might be a little off-putting. So, you do have some control, but certainly I think a lot less than other games.
That's an optional kind of way to look at the game. So, no, that's the way it's meant to be done. But you do have the option to just go through the process and pick what you want to play. Like you can go through the tables and say, okay, I'm going to be a Marine. I'm going to pick from this table this skill instead of rolling for it. I mean, you're still to some degree limited by what you can pick from, but you can certainly just say, I'm going to play a Marine. I'm going to pick this off of this table for this term, this off of this term. And you can create your character that way. By no means is that a fun way to do it. The way that the rules dictate you do it, I think, is the best way to do it. The question I would have...
I guess it depends. It depends on how you want to play it. Like
Exactly.
If you want to play a certain character, then if you are disallowed... So our classic example, I think we've mentioned in the podcast before, is our friend Billy had a conceptualization, and then when he rolled his second character after the first one died, he hated the conceptualization. And it made a bad game for him. So it really depends on the person, and how they approach their conceptualization of their relationship with their player.
Well, I have a
with their
question.
PC. Yeah.
Do you think that the way Traveler, and we're talking Mongoose Traveler here, just to keep it clear, do you think the way that it's set up, it's really beneficial for new players because it doesn't leave... I think it is because
I think it's harder for new players.
I think there's an advantage to it for new players in that it helps you define your character right out of the gate, and you don't sort of have to make up everything. You sort of have a template to go off of, and you say, hey, cool, my character had this event happen in his background, and my character had this mishap, so,
So, let's look at it this way. I mean, you can pick your profession that you go into, plus you can leave that and go to other professions. Now, what skills you end up with can be a little random, and that's what is supposed to help you role play your character. Like maybe you want to be a pilot. I want to be a pilot. I want to be the pilot, and you never roll it up. Well, maybe your character always wanted to be a pilot, but ended up being the astrogation, the navigator. I don't know. It just helps you get there. But there is one thing in the new version. At the end of character creation, and again, that's why I stress, and it even says so in the book. At the end of character creation, there is a set of core skills that are considered very beneficial to the any group that's going to go out into the and start exploring the galaxy. And this you are allowed, all the group is allowed to pick one skill from this group. So if let's say I'm trying to find it, I'm scrolling through the. So let's say one character, didn't get gun combat because they ran a Navy character. He can pick that. and just say, I want the gun combat skill. And maybe you don't have a pilot. That also is one of the skills at the end of character creation. You could just say, I want that skill. So they've addressed that since the classic version. And it makes it a little easier to role play. But I don't know, man. It's like you're creating your group. When I ran my original Traveler group, none of you guys were a pilot. I had an NPC as the pilot.
Stone.
You always relied on him to get where you were going, and he was quite unreliable. So to me, it just added flavor to the game. That you needed him to fly the ship, but he was off drunk somewhere, laid up with a.
Well, he was a pot
Galaxian,
smoking
prostitute.
He was a pot smoking Han Solo. Come on.
Yeah.
So I want, just to be clear, I want. It's not that it can't be fun. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm just saying if you prefer a certain style, this is a very different style, and that's it's not better or worse. It's just different, and some people like this better than that.
Do you guys know of?
Fine.
Yeah. Do you guys know of any other system that does it this way? That does character creation this way?
Call of Cthulhu is pretty close.
To do it that way?
You roll up a lot of.
it's
It's
true.
not as in depth, but you and the difference is because it's skill based. Traveler's what I would call a skill based system, where almost all your rolls are based on skills. Now, Dungeons and Dragons is what I would call a level based system, where you gain your skills and your abilities as you go along. Call of Cthulhu is very similar. You roll your background, you roll these things because you're already that private investigator. You're already that college academic. If you were playing Dungeons and Dragons, you're starting off as a fresh-faced 18-year-old with no abilities, and you build those abilities as you go.
Yeah.
Whereas Traveler, Call of Cthulhu, any skill-based one is going to most likely have the skills already there. You can get more skills as you go along, but not like Dungeons and Dragons when you level, where you start gaining abilities, start gaining spells, start gaining all these things. And when you're creating your character, if I want to be a cleric and I roll up a pretty crappy wisdom, think about that. That's a little bit of randomness too, unless the game master says, oh, you can roll it again, or you can switch your skills around. That's fine. I mean, in the rules, though, that's not the way it goes. I mean, you roll your attributes first, and then you look at them and say, hey, I've got an 18 strength. I would be a pretty good fighter. That's what I'm going to do. Or I got a great intelligence. I should do a wizard. I mean, it's just,
So one thing I think is really unique about Traveler, which I don't know that I've seen in any other game, is let's talk about attributes for just a second. I mean, they have the standard attributes that you would see. Something about dexterity, something about intelligence, something about strength. Those are pretty standard across many, if not all, systems. But the one that always struck me as unusual is social standing. And that's an attribute that is probably inherent in every game, implicit in every game. And there's a reason we use the term murder hobos. So most people's social standing in D&D is low, but it doesn't have to be. But it's not an explicit attribute. And it's always been intriguing to me that social standing was an actual attribute within Traveler. And I think it makes it challenging. I don't know if I want to use that word, but I'm going to, for players and GMs to how to incorporate that into role playing. Just like in a similar way that charisma sometimes could be challenging. How does that really play out? And I think that's a kind of a neat thing that Traveler does.
Well, it's because Traveler has several different campaign styles that you can get into. It's not exclusive to Traveler, but Traveler sort of leans heavily on this idea of you can play that military style game, or you can play that merchant style game where you get out your spreadsheets and you're trading goods between planets. And social standing and those kinds of things where you're doing more of a merchant-based gameplay would be more relevant, I think. And they, even in the back of the Traveler, did you notice that, Steve? I didn't know if you've had time to go through it because you just purchased it, but the Mongoose Traveler core rulebook has sheets of goods and how much they cost, and at the end there.
Yeah, I've got the first edition. I just bought the second edition.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. But anyway, the now social standing in Traveler plays out because the Imperium is sort of like, think of the Roman Empire. Okay, if it existed in space. So you have an emperor and you have nobility. So if you roll up, depending on your social status, if you roll, say, a 10 or 11, you're nobility. So now all of a sudden, that can play into the background of your character. If you roll, I think, a 10, you're at knight level. If you roll a 11, you're, you know, level up like a duke or something like that. And then if you're level 12, you're part of actually the royal family. But, you know, you could, why is this guy on a merchant ship, you know, going around the galaxy with a bunch of murder hobos?
Yeah.
You guys like
But
to say.
you know, it can give you access to game
that can
books.
actually play into it.
Yeah.
I mean, why is or he's the nobility guy and hires all you guys to say, hey, we're going to go explore this weird thing. I found a map, you know, ancient ruins or something, and I need help to go explore this thing. I'm the rich explorer. I mean, there's so many ways you can play it. And of course, social standing can mean how many contacts you have out there in the world. You're trapped, you know, you ran out of money or fuel on a planet or something like that, and you're in the city, and you can roll some dice. Hey, do I know anybody here? You know, will my name carry weight where I go? Things like that. Can I get out of this speeding ticket? Because I'm son of the sheriff. I mean, that's social standing right there.
Do you realize how fast you're going, son, in your spaceship?
Yeah.
There are ways that you can use social standing. It's certainly true, but I think it is a little more of a challenge because it's not something that if you've game mastered a past system, this is something you have to start factoring in at some level and saying, well, how does that really play out in the campaign, which is unique to Traveler. I'm not sure that I've seen it anywhere else. Another thing about attributes that is, I don't know that this is unique, but it is fairly rare, and Traveler may be the first one that I know of that did this, is that you don't have any hit points. So we're used to the concept of hit points, that you have a certain amount of damage that you can take before you shuck off this mortal coil and move on to the next one. In Traveler, it makes sense that as you get hurt, you're less capable of doing things. So that's reflected in actually your attributes. So there's things that we talked about, dexterity and strength and whatnot. Those things decrease as you take damage. And as a result, your abilities decrease, which is sort of can be punishing, but it's a much more realistic way to do it. And that, again, that's the first time I've ever experienced that. And I don't know many systems that use that. It's just kind of cool.
It's the only system I know that uses it. I'm sure there's probably others out there, and there's so many different game systems out there. I know in Mongoose, when we were playing with Steve, you would take off evenly off of strength, endurance, and dexterity. In Mongoose, I think the rule is you take it off endurance first, and then the character gets to choose to take it off of strength or dexterity next. And then if you reach 0 on all three stats, you're pretty much dead. If you hit 0 on 2 stats, then you're unconscious. So I like the taking it evenly off, though, and that's the rule I use. Yeah, have you guys looked at the Boon Bane stuff? That's something we haven't been using very much, but I'll be using more. Where you can, essentially you decide whether or not a task is more difficult or less difficult because of exterior forces, and then you add a die to your roll. So instead of a 2d6, you roll a 3d6.
Yeah, it's kind of like rolling at disadvantage
Or
in
advantage.
Dungeons and Dragons, or what is it in Call of Cthulhu? There's a rule for that too, where you add a die basically. To, I think they've all incorporated something similar.
Right.
I like it. Makes it easy for the DM to say this is a difficult roll.
Oh, for sure.
Another interesting thing about Traveler is, which you don't see in something like D&D for the most part, or many games, is this notion of tech level, which is really important to a lot of the game. So the notion that it's almost a Star Trekian approach, that there's a lot of these different societies, and some of them go back to the cave days, and some of them are more advanced than the average, and everywhere in between. And so what tech level that you exist at, both in terms of your campaign and also the planet you grew up on, or this place that you grew up in, it dictates a lot of what you're capable of doing and what you understand about the world, which is kind of a neat thing that, again, I don't think I've seen in a lot of other systems.
I don't know of any that does. Again, Traveler's so wide open in world creation and things like that. I'm not super familiar with a lot of other games like that. I know Star Frontiers came out years ago, but it was designed to be kind of a base. TSR put it out, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, what else is out there? I mean, it's so in-depth on everything, and you're right. They call it a Type M planet. If it's Earth-like, same thing Star Trek does. Type M planet. It's right in the middle, right? I don't know what else is out there. I mean, there's Star Trek, the role-playing game. I'm not talking about games that are based on movies or whatever, TV shows, but what other systems are out there?
Well, one that we haven't messed around with, which nearest I can work out, is just D&D in space, or effectively, which would be Pathfinders, what is it, Starfinder, or whatever the heck that thing is called.
Right.
That relatively new that came out. There was when D20 was all the rage, 4th edition, I guess it was. There was modern, D20 modern, and D20 science fiction and things like that. So again, based more on the D&D sort of style of rule set. There are so many systems out there now that are incorporating so many different rules that I'm sure there's hundreds and hundreds of others.
Yeah, there was a Rollmaster had a science fiction setting. I've got
Star
it
Master.
back there.
Yeah,
I've got it back there. I've never played it. I mean, it's just something I have. I mean, I know there's other games out there. Like, I've got that game Fading Suns, which has actually got a cool backdrop on that. We may play that. I got those books out yesterday and started looking through them. I may actually run a campaign on that after we do John Carter, just to try it out. Never got to play it before. So, just, again, one of those random books and games I pick up. But I was just going to say, for me, Traveler, the rule system suits my needs. I don't know. I mean, now that we're doing this podcast, and I've always, back in the day, when I played in I used to play in a couple different groups, and we would try a lot of different games. Kind of got away from that in the past few years, kind of mostly been playing Traveler. Then if the alternatives, Dungeons and Dragons, I guess you gravitate to what you really like. But I remember we used to play a lot of different games. I want to get back into that now that we're playing a little bit more than we used to. You know, you never know when you might find something really fun.
So let's put a bit of a bow here on the Traveler discussion. So one thing I did want to point out, the thing I think is very fascinating is Mongoose, I believe, have been putting out a whole bunch of Kickstarters over the last few years with new kind of supplemental things that you could join in and get access to. And there's a ton of rules and scenarios that they've messed around with. One that intrigued me, I would love to play it, I would never want to run it, was essentially these capital ships, and they had a whole set of rules for having a party that were members of a big capital ship, and you know what that looks like. So it has, again, a Star Trekian flavor, right? Because you're a member of a bridge crew or whatever it may be, and that is just a whole set of rules that they've used the basic Traveler rules to help construct this different way of doing these things. And there was another set that was done before that was about ground rules for
Striker.
No. This was Mongoose just did this like 2 years ago or something like that. It's similar to Striker, but it was slightly different. I don't remember what it's called. But so the thing that's neat about this is that Mongoose has committed, at least thus far, to evolving this rule set and allowing for a lot of flexibility, like Steve was saying. So it could do a lot of different things. So depending on the type of thing that you want to do, this rule set can be very malleable to your needs.
Yep, for sure. There are a couple other things that I really like about the game mechanics that I'll just mention briefly. I mean, the table, the way they set up their tables is very useful for a game master to really quickly reference and resolve issues. And then they have these a little bit more complicated approaches to things like multiple tasks, doing those all at doing multiple things at the same time. It's a really easy way to resolve it because they have a difficulty table that ranks your check. So basically an average check is you have to roll an 8 or better. And then as you go up or down, depending on the difficulty, it just moves that difficulty check up or down. Yeah, Frank?
Something I've never seen in any game that do it better is I absolutely adore that Traveler desperately wants to have a book ripped apart, because like the character creation things, if you want to make an entertainer or whatever, it's 2 pages. It's front and back. I mean, it desperately wants all those to be printed out on a single sheet of paper, front and back, and that's everything you need to do to make a character, which is just in that particular like Marine or Navy or whatever it may be. And that's just kind of really cool. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I do love
Similarly
that about Traveler
yeah.
for sure. And then they also have these time frame setups and subsequent tasks. Like if you have chained task, and you can have multiple people working on the same task, and if somebody fails their first roll, then the next roll that the next person has to do is 1 difficulty level higher. And then if they succeed, maybe it's a difficulty, it goes back down the list. So it goes from being formidable down to average or difficult. And that way you can have a thing like you got to disarm a bomb that is located in 3 different places, where it's chained together, where this one guy has to disarm it here, another guy has to disarm it here, another guy has to disarm it here. And if any one of them messes up, it makes the next person's task more difficult, where they might be able to succeed if somebody rolls a perfect roll at the end where the other guy screwed it up. Like engineering is a really good use of that particular mechanism. And then of course they have a time frame table, which gives you a basis for setting up the different amounts of time it takes you to do a particular task. So it can put an element of stress on characters if they only have a certain amount of time to get something done. So I like those mechanisms as well.
So here's a question that's going to be a hard question. Obviously, we all like Traveler and use it a lot. What do you dislike about Traveler? Is it just a perfect system? There's no problems with it?
Maybe I think the choice of a 2d6 system. I like it, but I think the gradations and the percent chance to succeed or fail, I think D20 is probably the best balance of that. So maybe that would be the thing.
I agree with you. I think actually I like percentile dice.
I do too.
I've always liked that because it is a skill-based system, and it just makes it so simple. Call of Cthulhu is a skill-based system, and it uses percentile dice, so it makes it real easy to do your modifiers up and down.
I agree.
You've got a certain level of strength. You roll up, you roll above it, you roll below it, or of course they have the difficulty or extreme task, which is their modifiers. But I just think percentile dice make it super simple. I've never really liked these sixes either, for whatever reason. I mean, first role-playing game I ever played was Dungeons and Dragons, in which case I always felt like maybe there were too many dice. That was the novelty of it, was that you had all these different dice for different things. But percentiles, D10s, and then maybe D6s for damage. That's all you really know. I would like that, but it is what it is. As people are fond of saying, I have no real issue with it. I mean, it's just what you adapt to.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree.
John.
I think he's playing with his dog.
I think so. But,
Yeah.
John, is there anything you dislike about Traveler?
Way to stay
what do you
focused.
dislike the most?
No, I guess probably the biggest thing, at least in classic or earlier Travelers, there's no real character progression. That's really the only thing I don't really care for. I mean, I do like that aspect of D&D where I've done all this stuff. We killed a dragon. We plumbed the depths of these dungeons and stuff, and now I'm better. I've increased my skill in whatever. I can hit harder, and they have a harder time hitting me now or whatever. There's improvements to your character, and I kind of like that aspect that you can improve it. I mean, we added that as homebrew rules, but I think it would have been better if that would have been some sort of built-in part of the rules. But that's it. Really, otherwise, I really enjoy it.
That's something I'll agree with you on that. That is one thing I never liked. That's one reason, at least with Classic Traveler, I created a way to improve your skills. That is a rule that I added, which I think everybody likes. You do like to feel like you're getting a little bit of progression. And I made it very limited, but at the same time, you still, I used my computer skill. I get to roll to see if I go up in it. So that helped. I don't know. What's the new how does the new progression work, Jimmy, in the new Mongoose?
You have to dedicate, I think it's a week of time in game to a particular skill, and then you roll against a D8 in order to get the skill. So if you don't have it at all and you want to get it at level 0, you have to roll an average roll of 8 or greater to get the skill, and you have to spend a week doing it. And you can't be doing anything else but that for a week.
And so a good example of that would be, let's say my character doesn't have gun combat, and we're in hyperspace traveling from one planet to the next, and I need that skill. So you take me down to the virtual gun range aboard ship, and I practice for a week learning how to use a handgun,
right?
For instance,
right.
And then at the end of that, I've got gun combat 0, right?
Yeah, it's something like that.
It's important to know that Traveler is a programmer's paradise because 0 is 1.
That's true.
Everything starts at 0.
That means you have the skill, but no proficiency in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then as you go, if you want to go from 0 to 1, it becomes more difficult, 1 to 2, and so on. And then as a game master, you want to make sure that you're limiting a lot of people want to do their training while they're traveling in jump space because it takes you a week to get anywhere in jump space. So you can just say, while I'm in jump space, I'm learning how to do astrogation. That's fine. But if you're in jump space and you're trying to improve your animal riding skill, well, then I'm not going to let you do that. I mean, you're going to have to be on a planet with critters. You can't be like on a space station.
That makes sense.
So,
right.
I mean, there are limitations.
Or you can learn how to use your lightsaber with your mentor.
That's right.
While you're in hyperspace.
You could do that.
So you get,
or not.
Luke was getting lightsaber skill 0 from Obi-Wan.
Exactly.
Because he could see the remote.
Thanks for that recap.
Psionics 0 too.
Oh yeah, we skipped over the psionics and the cybernetics and all the other mechanisms in the game for that front. On that front,
just about anything you can imagine in hard sci-fi is represented somewhere in Traveler.
Right.
You don't have to use it, but you can. You can make a cyberpunk world if you want.
Yep.
I mean, with augmented humans, you can make a planet of that if you want. I mean, that's the best part about it. I mean, there's a rule and a way to help you create just about anything in science fiction you can think of that you've ever read about.
My answer to that question is going to be a little bit of a cop-out because I'll be perfectly honest. Unlike everyone else, Traveler's not my favorite game. And if I were to assemble a game that had all of my favorite rules in them, I don't know if any of Traveler would make it in that game that I assembled. But what I think Traveler is very compelling at is that it is a good rule set to do almost anything. So it's very malleable. And I think that is its strength. So while I could sit there and say, I don't like this rule and I wish it did this and I would that differently, and I could literally pick apart almost every rule and say, this is why I don't like this bit. As a whole, it works. It works so well that it's hard to critique it terribly because while all the parts are, the sum of the parts are phenomenal. And so I really encourage, if you're interested in science fiction gaming, to check out Mongoose Traveler. It's a great system that will allow you to do a lot of different things. Even if this bit annoys you or that bit annoys you, it does all these things so well that you find yourself with a lot of variability and a lot of interesting stories you can work together to tell.
So one thing I wanted to talk about was what got me into Traveler, and I think I got you guys into
Well, I say
Traveler.
there's basically this
mistaken.
is a very easy story. It's what got Steve into Traveler, and then we did what Steve did. That's the other three of us had the same story. So it's
I think I introduced the game to you guys, and you did whatever you wanted with it. But I mean, for me, I had again, there were so many neat supplements with ships and everything. But one thing I didn't like in the original setting, I think is modeled from the Empire of Star Wars. Like all these planets are out there; they're all known. there's this huge galaxy of all of these different worlds that have been explored, and there's all these trade routes and all this, and you really have to get to the fringes of known space. Now, keep in mind, there's supplements that map all of that, and have details about each one of the planets you can travel to. And I'm talking literally thousands of worlds. There's so much work that went into it, but I was never a big fan of the whole Imperium and the galaxy being known. So I created my own universe. We did an episode earlier a while back on world building, and that's my primary world building. I created a quadrant of space that included Earth and a bunch of different planets. I created my own politics, my own background for each one of those worlds, but it wasn't as well known as Traveler. There was a lot more unknown space, a lot more left out there to explore, and I just preferred to create my own background. But the rules fit perfect with what I wanted to do, because I have all these supplements of ships, I have all these supplements of weapons, I've got all of these different things that I can bring in at my choice to say, yes, we can do this. No, we can't do this. And again, because I can't create everything, but I could create all my planets, my political systems, backgrounds, and everything. And then I use the tools that they have, their central supply catalog to outfit the group, the starships and all that kind of stuff. I'm not doing everything from scratch. And then the rule system's simple. Combat is relatively simple to resolve, and I like that in any game. I like to do the combat. Let's get it resolved, and let's move on with the story. We're not gonna spend 2 hours to resolve one conflict. Just a firefight or a starship encounter. It can be that if you want it to, but typically you can move quickly through the combat, which is another thing I like. But Traveler is one of those systems where you can use tons of supplements. You can use all these source books if you want, but you can also pick and choose what you want to use. And the combat system in the long run is relatively simple. So those are the reasons I use it. And at the time, it was the only hard sci-fi game out there that had all these things that offered. And that appeals to me because I like to read hard science fiction. And, that's what brought me to the game. It's so much stuff to choose from.
For me, it's really simple, and I can sum it up pretty quickly, is that I like how it creatively inspires me to do things differently. Like with Dungeons & Dragons, it's just straight on combat, murder hobo approach to things. But with Traveler, for example, we did a game recently where it was the characters against a hazardous environment where they're stuck on a planet with a corrosive atmosphere and running out of oxygen. And then the next game could be a combat-based game, and the next game can be a murder mystery on a spaceship. It just helps me. You can do that in a fantasy game for sure. Combat in zero-G versus being on a heavy gravity planet. It helps me just come up with creative adventures based around that kind of those different kinds of environments that are available in Traveler pretty easily. And then, there's one last thing we probably want to talk about, unless John wants to pipe in here about what he likes about Traveler is, where do you go to get stuff for Traveler?
The internet, like everything else.
I guess
the Four Horsemen, they can order it for you.
I know you can get it on Mongoose's main page. Do they sell it like on Drive-Thru RPG?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
they
right.
did.
You can also,
and they have 6 core rule books, 10 source books, 15 adventures and campaign books, and some fiction books. So there's a lot of material out there, and they're keeping up with it. And Mongoose, Matthew Sprange, who runs Mongoose, he's really
the
dedicated
nice thing.
to it.
If you buy it through, and the Chaosium does this as well. I wish I would have realized it when I bought my Call of Cthulhu books recently. But if you buy it from Amazon, you can save some money, okay, and you'll get the nice hardback book. But if you buy it from Mongoose, you get a free PDF of the book as well. And the same thing with Chaosium. If you buy their books at retail price, and plus I had to pay, because I just bought the 2nd edition core rule book from Mongoose, and if you pay, I had to pay like $8 shipping. So I had to pay retail plus the $8 shipping. If I would have bought bought it from Amazon, I probably could have saved $20, but I got the PDF for free. Anytime you buy directly from Mongoose, you can do that. So, and I'm not sure I've never used it. What's Drive-Thru RPG? What is that?
It is old man. It is an online website with all kinds of role playing game resources. A lot of it's electronic, and I think it's an exclusive site for Wizards of the Coast. So if you're making your own materials off of the SRD, you can release it, but you have to release it through Drive-Thru RPG. I think that's the site. So it's a good resource. You should check it out.
Okay. And one last thing, as far as if you want to get into Traveler, I've just purchased the core rulebook, the second edition. I mean, again, there's zillions of supplements. Don't drive yourself crazy. The core rulebook has everything you need to get started. And in fact, this core rulebook is very nice. It includes, some starship stuff, some deck plans, things like that. I mean, you can do anything you need to get started with the game with the core rulebook, and then branch out from there if you like it.
And if you like the original Traveler, you can get the core rulebook sort of wrapped up in that box set with the small books. They have
I've got all that. Yeah. Yep. And plus, I've got a lot of the originals. But one last thing is,
This is like the fifth one last thing.
Well, we love Traveler so much.
I do love the game, but it is available on Fantasy Grounds. If you use Fantasy Grounds to run your D&D campaign, Traveler is on there. It's one of the licensed products. Roll20 does not have Traveler. And I've looked at a few of the modules and the rule books and stuff, and it looks pretty neat. I haven't done anything with it. I may in the future. Jimmy, I was thinking you were thinking about doing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
with all my spare time.
Yeah. I'm swamped. I don't know, man. I could talk about Traveler for another 2 hours easily. So, I just, again, it's just a great role system. I love science fiction and everything I want. There's a rule and an idea. Ideas are probably the thing about the supplements, just to be able to look in there and think of something of my own. But it's a great system to create your own universe, which is what I've done, and later went on to create this universe and wrote stories in it and things too. So it all started from just a handful of worlds that you guys left from one world, started exploring, and expanded out from there. So
okay, anything else we want to say about Traveler? Any last things?
There is a version of Traveler that if you're more into the exploration thing and actually want a rule set based on that, is Traveler 2300. And it's based on exploration a little bit more. I've never played it. I've just seen it. So
it's one of the only Traveler's one of the only systems I've ever seen that had something like the Scouts, this whole branch where you're on the far fringes. Usually that's in most games that tends to be ne'er-do-wells, on the fringes of society. But no, the actual Scouts, you're supposed to go out and explore things, which is kind of cool.
You could be. Yeah. It's sort of like joining the French Foreign Legion in the future. It's where you send that disgraced noble to get him out of the house.
The black sheep.
Okay, so like I said, Traveler is a pretty dynamic and interesting system, and it's got a lot of different versions. Check out the latest version. I think it's probably the best synthesis of all the best ideas from the past versions into one. So if you're into hard science fiction and it's a thing you'd like to run, you can't get any worse than Traveler in our book. So I'm sure that we will reference Traveler at least 18 times an episode in the future. So you'll hear plenty more about the things that Steve would have gone on for another 2 more hours about in coming episodes. But Traveler's wonderful. Check it out.
That's all we have for this week. Thanks for spending time with us. Please leave a review and comments wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have topic suggestions or would like to get in touch, you can reach us at roleplaygeeks@roleplaygeeks.com. Head on over to the website for an archive of all our previous shows, as well as links to all our social media channels. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next week.